Does Sam know we're eating his blueberries?
Yeah, he said we could.
Well, that's a good thing, because I'm going to keep doing it. These are delicious.
There's nothing more irresistible than backyard fruits.
Well, that goes double for me if it's raspberries and strawberries. I'm Barbara Damrosch.
And I'm Elliot Coleman. And if you'll stay with us for the next half hour, we'll give you tips on growing fruit in your backyard.
On gardening naturally.
This high bush blueberry planting is certainly being run as naturally as possible. Mother Nature is in charge. When these plants were put in about 30 to 40 years ago, they were kept weed-free for the first few years until the plants were well established. But since then, this is definitely a low-work system. And even though it might not be my style of operation, I certainly can't complain about the production.
Yes, when we put ours in, we put them in rows with mulch around them to keep down the grasses and the weeds. But boy, these sure have done fine on their own. Somebody must have given these a good start, Elliot.
Well, that's always the key with backyard fruits. You want to find the proper site for them, and you want to plant them right from the start. And we'll show you how we did that with ours this spring. The blueberry that you're going to plant may arrive looking like this. It's covered with plastic to keep the roots from drying out, and it has a tag on there to tell you what the variety is. Now, as with any plant, when you're working out of doors, especially if the sun is shining, you want to put it in a bucket of water while you're waiting to plant it so the roots won't dry out. Now, one of the first considerations with blueberries is they like an acid soil. Our soil here is naturally acid. I don't have to worry about that. But if you're in an area where that isn't true, you're going to want to get a soil acidifier from the people who sell you your blueberry plants to mix in the soil at the recommended rate in order to give blueberries the growing conditions that they like. The other things blueberries like, even though they're a small plant, is a good-sized hole. And as I dig this hole, I'm going to put this soil into this bucket here that I have half filled with peat moss. And there's a reason for that, too. Peat moss is a good way to keep moisture in the soil and also to create acid conditions. And I'm going to mix these two together, just peat moss and soil in here as much as I can, in order to get a nice medium to put around the roots of this plant when I stick it in the ground. See that nice brown peat moss, how that really improves the soil here. Okay, I have that mixed together. I'm ready to plant. I'm going to take this, open up the roots somewhat that are trapped into that moss there, and set it in the hole in the right position. And then I'm going to dig handfuls of soil and peat moss out of my bucket and mix them in around the roots. Now, I haven't put any fertilizer in here, and that's because it's hard to fertilize blueberries without raising the pH, making the soil less acid. And so for the first few years, you don't need to do any of that. These are plants that, as long as they have an acid soil and plenty of moisture, will grow just fine. Take the rest of this peat moss and soil around, get that in around the hole, and I have a well-planted blueberry bush. Now, being a moisture-loving plant, blueberries have shallow roots, and so you're not going to want to cultivate around here to keep weeds down, because if you do, you're going to be cutting their shallow roots. So the best way to deal with weeds in a blueberry patch is to do what we've done here and use a mulch. In this case, a mulch of chopped wood chips. Spread them around. You can also use sawdust. It's very effective. You can get that easier than this. And that will give you the ideal way to plant blueberries. And the final step is to prune off about 1/2 to 1/3 of the top growth. The reason you're doing that is because the newly transplanted roots can't quite support all of this yet. I'll take a pair of pruning shears and I'll cut to an out-facing bud so the growth will tend to go out and give this plant some form. And by the time I've done that, the job is finished and the blueberry is ready to grow. Now, planting raspberries is similar, but with a few differences. The difference with raspberries is in the soil preparation. For them, I want as fertile a soil as I can get. And so I have tilled under in here lime to raise the pH, phosphate rock, green sand, and alfalfa meal. The same amendments that I use to make any soil fertile. And I've also put on some compost. tilled them in, created a nice fertile soil. Again, I'm going to dig a big hole because it's important with any plant that you give its roots plenty of space when you stick them in the ground. I have them in the bucket soaking. I'm going to take that out. That's a very nice raspberry plant. Put it in there to the proper depth, which is about an inch or two lower than it was in the nursery. And as I fill the soil in around it, I keep spreading and lifting the roots, so instead of being packed into the bottom, they all have plenty of space to grow, plenty of space to find nutrients in the soil to get this plant well established. There, that should about do it. Now, in order to provide plenty of good food for this plant in the future, I'm going to put a mulch of this spoiled hay around it. It could be any semi-decomposing material, half-finished compost or something, just so there's new plant food going down into the soil continuously as that breaks down. And then again, in order to keep weeds down, I'm going to cover that with a mulch of wood chips. The raspberry's in there, and it's ready to grow.
Gardening Naturally will return on TLC.
Furniture to Go, weekdays at 5 on TLC.
How far would you go to guarantee a beautiful garden? You don't have to glass in your garden to guarantee healthy, beautiful perennials year after year. All you really need is the Complete Gardener's Book of Perennials, only from Time Life. It's information on soil, garden design, pest control, and more than 100 popular perennials, all for just $1.99. Plus, get this free tip-filled gardening handbook. And when you use your credit card, this gardener's tote bag. All three for just $1.99. You can't buy a more valuable tool for your garden. In fact, we'll guarantee it. Grow a better garden or your money back. If you like perennials, you can preview other volumes in the series. For $2, we'll guarantee you a perfect perennial garden. And we'll give you change.
To order, call 1-800-843-7400. To receive your free Gardener's Tote Bag, have your credit card ready. Ask for perennials for just $1.99 plus $3.95 shipping and handling, and receive your free gardening handbook. That's 1-800-843-7400. Call now.
A single voice in the distant past changed our world forever. His teachings light up our lives, give us hope for the future. But the Bible tells only part of his story. It's the starting point for modern research. Findings that offer a detailed portrait of his life in the Holy Land and a glimpse of the way all people lived so long ago. Look back on Jesus and His Times. A full evening, Friday beginning at 8 on TLC.
Gardening Naturally now returns on TLC. Barbara and I are planting enough strawberries these days that we figured out a technique that's easier than the way we used to do it. And we used to dig a hole and carefully spread the plant roots out in all directions. Now that took a lot of time. Our new technique is a lot quicker. I take the spade and jam it into the ground where I want to plant and pull it toward me, and then I leave it up to Barbara.
It's a good two-person job. I'll take the strawberry plant, paying close attention to how deep I plant it in relation to the soil level. I want the soil to just cover where those roots start, but just below where the sprouts are starting to come out. So right about there. Now, when he's made his hole, I'll spread the roots out in a fan shape, again, keeping it right at the proper depth in relation to the top of the soil. Okay, you can let it go, Elliot.
Then I pull the spade out, and the soil neatly goes across there, and the strawberries in there at just the right depth. Now, we're going to put these in down the center of this bed at about 12 to 18 inches apart, depending on the vigor of the variety. And this is called the row system. A single row down the middle of the bed. You ready for the next one?
Go for it.
What will happen in this bed is that strawberries multiply themselves by runners, and each plant will send runners out to fill in the area along the side. And by next summer, when these are cropping, there will be plants all over this area, and we will really have a bounteous crop. This row system is the best way to do June bearers. But when I plant everbearers, those are plants that I can actually get a crop from the year I put them in the ground. I do them a different way. I do them on what's called the hill system. On the hill system, I put one plant every place I would like them to grow. And the reason I do this for everbearers is that everbearers will give me a crop the year I plant them, and they'll give me the best crop from the biggest and oldest plants. the plants that I actually put in first thing in the spring. And so when runners start to form on these, I'll pinch them off because I want these plants to grow and have space. And if I do that, they will give me a massive crop of delicious strawberries the whole second half of the summer on the year I put them in the ground. It's been about 3 weeks since I put these strawberry plants in, and now comes the next step in helping them get established well. I'm going to pinch off the blossoms. Now, that may seem like a strange thing to do, remove any chance they have of making fruit, but I'm doing it for a very good reason. These plants are too small to both grow and make fruit at the same time. And I want to grow good, healthy plants here, big leaves, good root systems, so I can get an exceptional crop next year on these June bears. And the best way to do that is to take off the blossoms this year. Now, with the everbearers, they have a much longer blossoming season than June bearers. So if I take off the blossoms for the first 2 months after I put the plants in the ground, I can then let them form after that on the everbearers and get a delicious fall crop of strawberries. What we're doing is very simple. You just take your thumb and forefinger and pinch that blossom off just like that. And not just the blossoms, because it's taking a lot of energy for this plant to make the buds also. Learn to recognize them and pinch them off as soon as you see them. You may think you're wasting this year's crop, and I suspect you are, but you'll really be happy next year when you get an enormous quantity of berries because you did that work this year.
I've got a tasty little fruit crop right here in my flower garden, alpine strawberries. They're very similar to the wild woodland strawberries that we have around here, but a little bigger than that, and they bear over a much longer period of time. Lots of them in early summer, sporadically through the summer, and another crop towards the end of the summer. They're very, very tasty. You're never going to get a great big pie full of them the way you will with our regular strawberries over in the vegetable garden, but they're also a very ornamental plant as well. They've got the typical strawberry flowers, cute red fruits, and also a nice, tidy, mounded habit. They're not sending out these long runners the way the ones in the vegetable garden are. So they're a great edging plant here for my rose garden. These were planted last year, and now they've become a nice, bushy border. Next year, they might need some rejuvenation. So in very early spring, just as growth is starting, I'll dig them up and divide each clump, replant part of it, and then make a whole other edging somewhere else in the garden. Then I'll have even more tiny berries to sprinkle on a bowl of cereal or on top of a creamy pie.
Now that's a well-armored, newly planted fruit tree. And this is a new idea for protecting them. I was in Australia a year ago, and I noticed where they were planting new forests, there were little tubes protecting the young seedlings that had been put out. When I returned to the U.S., I looked around and I found out that products like this were available from forestry catalogs, and you could ask the company where you buy your fruit trees. Basically, they're called tree tubes, and what they do is give the tree a protected growing environment when it's young. This model also comes with a little mesh net that you can close over the top when you first put the tree in there to keep a bird from going down in there, which has happened. You certainly want to prevent that. Now, when the tree does grow out the top, you could take this protective mesh off, or you could do as I've done, open it up and let the protection for the tree, maybe against an animal or something, continue on for a while longer. And you have all your problems solved. Except one. You might have a real deer problem. If I did, I would drive a stake around the four corners here and put some sort of metal or plastic fence around a little individual tree. If I had a lot of trees, I might want to put some sort of very effective fence around the whole orchard. If I were a deer walking up to a small orchard or garden with a perimeter fence of this material, I wouldn't be able to get in because it's tall and a very effective barrier. But what makes me most pleased as a landowner is because it's black, it's almost invisible, and I don't have to look at it all the time. As far as I know at the moment, this material is only available from Benner's Gardens in New Hope, Pennsylvania. Sow Zero Winery is a delightful place. Its owner, Tom Hoy, is one of those fortunate individuals who has managed to turn a hobby into a business. Tom makes wines from unique ingredients: apple, chokecherry, blueberries, and rhubarb. Tom's always around somewhere. The way to find him is to ring the bell. Hi, Tom.
Good morning, Elliot.
How's your spring been?
It's been a beautiful spring. Everything's a little late, though.
And how do you judge that here?
Well, the lilacs are usually in bloom for my daughter's birthday, and they're at least a week late this year.
It's a great way to tell. And how's the rhubarb doing?
I think it's ready.
Well, let's cut some then, Tom.
All right. I'll just give it a twist. Take it out, cut off the leaves. Put the leaves here to compost.
Now, as many people know, rhubarb is not technically a fruit. It's a stem. But since it comes early in the spring when there aren't any other fruits and has the right taste, it's used for fruit dishes, like rhubarb pie and, of course, for wine. Now, what's the secret of growing good rhubarb, Tom?
Well, rhubarb, as you know, is a perennial, and it's a simple plant to grow. It's not bothered by many insects. Its basic requirement is that it's a heavy feeder and needs a lot of manure, put on preferably in the fall.
So it's ready to make it grow in the spring.
That's right. It's one of the first things to pop up after the ground freezes.
Great. Well, let's start harvesting, Tom. I'll help pull, you cut.
All right. So this is a pressing shed.
Okay, now this is the first step in winemaking.
Yeah, this is where we have to press the fruit. We have to grind the fruit before we press the juice out of it. And that's what this...
Great gadget this is.
Yeah,
you
isn't
just
this
put
great?
the stock in there?
Right. And
Now, what would somebody do at home if they didn't have one of these?
well, they could use any kind of a kitchen blender, maybe even a wringer washer.
And the whole idea is just to break the stem up enough so that when you put it in the press, the juice is...
That's right, so we can
get.
get as much juice out of it as possible. Now that we've crushed the stalks, the next thing is to press the juice out of them.
Boy, that's a great old press, Tom. Where would someone get something like this?
Isn't this a beauty? Well, if you're lucky, you might find one of these in a yard sale. But actually, any of those backyard apple cider presses would be great for pressing rhubarb. That's a great color.
Isn't that a beautiful color? Oh,
Too bad we have to add water to it.
yeah.
But
What happens if you use it straight?
no, it would just, I think it would be overwhelming.
Well, after 2 hours, we've gotten about all the juice out that we can. Now, how do we turn this into wine, Tom?
Well, Elliot, we want to pour it through the funnel here in the strainer into a glass container where we can see what's happening.
Now, how much sugar and yeast needs to be added, Tom?
Well, Elliot, I add 2 pounds of sugar per gallon. And yeast, you can just get one of those little packets, which will do 5 gallons.
And where does somebody get a packet of yeast?
Oh, you can get them in any beer and wine supply store. A general all-purpose wine yeast is fine.
And after that, it's just a question of waiting around?
Well, yes, we fill up the carboy, and then we put in one of these little fermentation locks.
Now, that's a cute little gadget. What is this doing?
Well, that allows the carbon dioxide to bubble out through the water, but prevents the oxygen from coming back in and spoiling the wine.
And when is this wine ready to drink? That's the important question.
Well, I'd say 6 months to a year. It's just about right.
That seems like a short time.
Well, some wines benefit by longer aging, but I like rhubarb when it's young and fruity.
Yeah, well, it looks good to me. Now, let's pretend a year has passed. Can we go and taste some of last year's production?
I think that's a great idea. Well, here it is, bottled up, Elliot. Last year's rhubarb. I think it's at its peak now, but certainly good for another year in the bottle.
This is very professional looking, Tom. I love the label. I love the picture. But I especially like the wine. I would say fruity with a hint of down east flair.
I wanted to show you a planting of mature raspberries. So I'm visiting my friend Diana Bristol, and she's got some wonderful ones. This happens to be a great variety called Purple Royalty, which is actually a cross between a blackberry and a raspberry, and that's why those berries are so big and fat and juicy. She has a very simple system of trellising here, just some stout rustic poles with some strands of heavy-duty wire attached, and this gives her something to tie them up to so they don't flop down into the pads. The pads are great, too. Just a strip of mown grass, and it comes up very close to the base of the plant, and this discourages weeds. Now, these berries that bear only once in the season bear on old canes. So these canes were formed last year and are now producing raspberries. These, on the other hand, are this year's canes, and they're not producing. Now, what Diana's going to do late this winter is cut all of this back to the ground. These, on the other hand, she'll leave for next year. But since this is such a vigorous plant, she says that she thins these to about 3 canes per plant so that it doesn't become such a jungle here. Now, I'll show you what technique she uses over here for her ever-bearing raspberries. Ever-bearing raspberries aren't exactly ever-bearing. They bear twice, once in fall and then the following summer. Now, this is a cane that bore last fall, and now it's the following summer, and it's bearing again. This one is this year's new shoot, and it will bear this fall, and then again next summer. Now, there's 2 ways of handling raspberries like this. You could cut them all down in the middle of the winter and let the new ones come up and only bear a fall crop, which would be fine if you had a row of summer ones over there somewhere. On the other hand, some people like to get those 2 crops, especially if it's the only row of raspberries they have. In that case, you would cut down these, as Diana does, after they've finished bearing, and have more room for the new ones to come up for your fall crop.
Once the newly planted ever-bearing strawberries are well established, I let the flower buds form so they can begin making fruit, which we will eat all summer and through the fall, but I take off the runners because I don't want the plants using up any energy on them since I don't need the extra plants. I want it all to go into fruit. By taking good care of these ever-bearing strawberries, I've gotten to the point now where we can enjoy them. I pinched off the runners and they put all their energy into growing good strong plants with lots of fruiting branches. And now that it's past the middle of the summer, the fruit are starting to ripen, and they'll continue to ripen and be pickable right on through till hard frost. Whereas strawberries are a fruit that you can either get the year you plant them, or at least the following year, to get your blueberries to this stage is going to take a few years, but it's definitely worth the wait, because high bush blueberries are a very vigorous plant, and they live a long time. In fact, you'll be picking blueberries off your plants for 40 to 50 or even more years. But don't pick them just because they're blue. A lot of people are going to look at these and say, aha, they're all ripe, but they're not quite all ripe. Here's 2 blueberries who both look blue on the surface, but when you turn them over to the stem end, that one is ripe, this one is still red there. And this one is going to be a bit sour. You're not going to enjoy this. This one is going to be like heaven. Now, that's a trick to remember when you're picking blueberries. Wait a little longer, look at the backside, and you'll get the perfect one.
Is it just because we grew these strawberries, or are they really the best you've ever tasted?
Oh, there's no question in my mind. When you grow them at home, you can leave them on the plant and ripen them to the very peak of perfection. And even though there's a bit of labor involved in establishing your home fruit crops, once they're growing, you get to enjoy them for years to come.
And while we enjoy the fruits of our labor, goodbye and good gardening.
Next on TLC, doing something for your home can be easy, even fun. Check and see here on Homebodies. Then, add value to your home with some serious improvements. The Home Pro shows you how.